Hello. Um, this is actually the first video that I'm making on this channel, and I've thought about making a YouTube channel for a while. Um, but I just have never really gotten around to it. And so I guess this is my first foray into uh, making YouTube videos and seeing how that is and how that goes. Um, Really, I wanted to make this channel to talk about God and where I am right now in my faith journey, I guess. Um, and because I feel that this is probably the thing that most matters to me personally, like that's kind of the ultimate question. And I think it's not, at least me in my life, I don't really have much of an outlet. Like as in I don't have anyone I can really talk this through with in a serious way for a bunch of reasons. But I thought, no, this could be a nice opportunity since I wanted to, because I think my thoughts become clearer when I like speak them out loud. And so this is sort of the main purpose actually of this. Um, I don't really foresee that this could ever become like big, and that's really not necessarily my intention. I just want the chance and the opportunity to be able to, and the obligation also, responsibility to be able to speak about this regularly. Um, so uh, I guess I should just begin by saying what it is that I, where I'm at the moment. Um, and I was brought up in quite a religious family, and I had a wonderful childhood. I have a great family. Um, and um, and when I was growing up, though, around maybe seventh or eighth grade, I began to have serious. Um, I began to be more skeptical, and I remember the very first time I like started to really doubt what I was taught growing up, um, was when I was, I think, in sixth or seventh grade, and I still remember this moment. And it was, um, I had read somewhere or seen somewhere, um, mentioned that agriculture began around 10,000 BC or so, and I saw that this was earlier than when um, it was recorded in the Bible, like for Cain and Abel, the story of Cain and Abel, when agriculture began with, I think, Abel being the first, or sorry, Cain being the first tiller of the field. So I was like, there's some differences there. Um, and that was the first time I really started to doubt, and I after that I started looking very seriously into the question. I had like a phase where I was very obsessed with this topic, and it actually, uh, for better or worse, corresponded exactly with the new atheist movement um, when that was happening. And so there were a lot of debates out there with um, Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins, and all of them were talking about um, debating various apologists, and that's, I mean, I did have all those debates. I essentially watched like every single one, um, and I listened to their audiobooks, all of them. and um and that's kind of when I would say, so that by around high school, I think I still clung to um faith, um but but um but I definitely, I started having serious doubts. And I think if someone were to ask me seriously, like, what the chances are that, like, um that either something like God exists, or that Jesus actually walked on water or turned water into wine, I would probably, if I was honest, would have said that the chances probably weren't very high. So 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 that was in high school, and I would say by the end of high school, I sort of left became more comfortable with atheism. Um, and I think probably somewhere around 10th grade was when I would have secretly called myself um, an atheist, essentially. And and yeah, it was sort of like my big secret. I never mentioned it to anyone. Um, it was it was very much my own private thing. And actually, I should linger for a second and say exactly why I didn't mention it. Part of it was maybe just like fear, like religion was really big for my family, and so um, that they wouldn't accept me, or that I might be cast out in a way. That may have been part of it. Um, but also um, part of it was that this was a very important subject to me, and I just, by temperament, when something is really important to me, I don't really like talking about it. Um, so, but for whatever reason, and also there were other things, I almost felt guilty about feeling this way, because I felt like I was undermining um my family, I guess, by having this belief, or lack of belief. And yeah, so it was sort of like my little secret. Um, and I continued into college, where that was my um, worldview, was essentially, I guess, atheism and even materialism. Um, and um, like, I think a lot of uh, the uh, the reason why I didn't believe in God was that I just could not imagine the miraculous. Like, um, I guess I was just so steeped in sort of the materialistic worldview, in the sense of that there are like these fixed laws of nature, and there's just matter, and matter obeys these laws of nature, and everything follows from that. It was just so ingrained in me that I really just had trouble even imagining, like, that there could be miracles. Um, and then in college, I would say I became uh, I became more and more I mean, I had always been very attracted by religion. Even when I really didn't think it was true, I was still like attracted very much by like apologetic works, or by like Christian devotionals, or like even like fictional figures. Like um you have Sonia in in Dostoevsky's work, or Alyosha, or um or you have the bishop in in uh, um, in Les Mis, like these characters that really still continue to attract me. Um, and I felt like there was something very valuable in religion, even if I wasn't really yet, if even if I didn't really believe in any of it, I still felt there was something very valuable there. And it wasn't even necessarily a fully conscious thing. It was just like a draw to this. And and doubtless that was in part because of my upbringing. Um, so so that was my college experience, and I became, I guess, more drawn to that in college. And and so I was kind of living in, I'd say, two different worlds. Like I still drew nourishment from this. Like I had, there was a time when I was like praying pretty regularly, so that's obviously not very strange, like you're sort of like there's discord in yourself, or even I had phases where I would attend church very regularly, and so I was attending church while I actually deep down I felt like all of it wasn't true at all. So, but that's human beings, and sometimes, like what actually draws us isn't necessarily what our minds tell us is worth pursuing. So there, and and I think I also sort of lost um my grounding in materialism. Like I lost um this like absolute faith that the whole world, like everything in the world, can be explained by just matter obeying like a few very fixed natural laws that can be understood, that might be just mathematical. Um, and and that was because of a lot of reasons. And actually, like there were there was a lot happening during that time, and it's hard for me to go back and say exactly why I lost it. I think part of it was I remember I had a phase where I was, for the first time, I think, thinking seriously about consciousness. And and it was just the very fact that it exists either says that when that this I felt like it contradicted like the tenets of materialism, or or that if you wanted to make materialism, to expand materialism to fit consciousness as well, I felt that what you meant by matter had to be very the meaning of matter had to kind of change. That matter could be something that can give rise to consciousness, in which case the possibilities, I mean, that are then possible under materialism would be enormous. Like if matter can come together and form consciousness, what else can it form? What if you move more in that direction, whatever that direction is of self-awareness? Um, and it was that, but it was also a bunch of other things that I read, personal experiences, uh, just what seemed most reasonable to me in the world based on my, like lived experiences and reflections on life, I guess. Um, it just made it less likely to me that it made it less obvious to me that materialism just had to be true, you know. Um, and so that's when I started to sort of become more interested for the first time, like seriously, in religion, um, um, as like potentially true and not just a really attractive idea. Um, and so I've continued on. I'm now still I'm a grad student, but um, I would say I'm still in this phase where I'm still very attracted by these ideas. and um and I actually am, I would say, observant in the religion I was brought up in, which is Christianity. But like deep down, I don't really think it's true. Um, like, and I mean, people can change what they mean by a Christian or not a Christian, but at the end of the day, like the way that I put it to myself is, do I think if I was there, you know, 7,000 years ago or 6,000 years ago, would I have seen a worldwide flood? I don't think so. I don't think if I was teleported or transported back in time, um, 6,000 years, I don't think I would have seen a worldwide flood. Um, do I think that if I was transported 3,500 years ago, would I have seen the Red Sea split in two? I don't think so. I think balance of probability is against that I would have actually seen that. Now, of course, there could be like a really deep poetic meaning to the stories in Exodus, or um, like that the part of you that's attracted to that story, that these stories have more than just a literal meaning or significance, and that they could still be significant even if they weren't actually true. But I don't think it's as true as like, the Battle of Austerlitz, like with Napoleon. Like, so I don't think it's history, you know. Um, so and then continuing on from that, I don't think if I was there 2,000 years ago in Cana, I don't think I would have seen water turn actually into wine. Like, if I was there at the wedding of Cana, where Jesus was there, I don't think I would have seen the water turn actually into wine. Um, I don't. So that's sort of where I'm at right now. Um, and so the reasons that I don't believe it's true, I mean, there are just so many reasons. Um, um, but I could just dwell on a few right now. Um, like if you think, or sorry, just wrapping up the last argument, like also, I don't think if I was there 2,000 years ago that I would have seen a new star in the sky, to announce the birth of Jesus. Um, but I don't know. I don't know whether how one would define a Christian, but I think I think according to most standard definitions of Christianity, I would not be really a Christian. Um, Even though I do tend to pray, and even though I am deeply attracted by Christianity, even though I um, read a lot of Christian inspired works, um, I still don't actually believe that it's true deep down. Um, so so yeah, so returning back, I guess what are the reasons that I don't believe? Um, I mean, there are a lot that I can bring up, but I'll just bring up like sample three examples just to show some of the reasons why I feel like the balance of probabilities against this being, again, like literally true, like actually true. Um, so so one example is, I feel that if you read the New Testament honestly and you read the Gospels, it's clear, at least to me, that Jesus did think that the world was going to end fairly soon. Um, and there are all sorts of passages. I won't rehearse the whole arguments, but I know that there rationalizations for Jesus's sayings that people have for that they can use to say that, oh, he didn't really mean that that the world was actually ending. Maybe he was, but I think it seems to me that these arguments are dishonest. If you just read the arguments, and in an honest way, not taking things out of context, not taking things literally when it was obviously just a metaphor, because they're or poetic, because I think there are examples where that is the case in the Bible, which is a huge corpus of literature of all different types. So there are situations where it is just poetic, or it is clear that this is just meant for exaggeration, or but if you just read what's there, at least in my reading, in a very honest way, I think if you close the book, you would be expecting, if you take Jesus's words, that the world would be ending pretty soon afterwards. Like, I think Jesus would have been pretty surprised that the world has gone on for another 2,000 years. Um, so that's like one thing. So there was predictions made about the end of the world, and those um haven't checked out really. There's also, of course, the stories of Genesis and about the origins, and those are very strongly contradicted by what now we kind of know is true about the history of humanity and the history of the earth, and how it was actually made. And again, I know that those are um, that people will argue that, like, oh, maybe these were just meant poetically, but and perhaps, but still, I don't know. I like the Genesis story, where the Genesis one, you have telling of all the days of creation, and God creating all the different um existing entities in the world on different days and stuff. Um, like, it's clear that there's a poetic element there, but like, I still don't think it is actually true. Like, the things that are mentioned, that they actually happened. Um, so that's like another thing there. And it's just like, if you read it, it's it's very clear. It's like, it's way more likely to me that that these stories, they are the mythology, the founding legends, the folk traditions of a people. And they're sort of the same sorts of stories as, stories about uh, the wars between the gods and the giants in Norse mythology, or the gods and the titans, and indeed in virtually all traditions, all religions, there are these stories. Um, so I think the Genesis stories are in that class. Um, so that's another reason that I think it's just I don't know, it's just not actually like true. Um, Also, here's another kind of reason. Like, you have the Exodus. So the story as it stands is that God brought all these like catastrophic plagues on Egypt. Um, and one plague was that there was literally utter darkness for 3 days in the land of Egypt, and 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 of course, God in the last plague kills all the firstborn of the Egyptians, and he splits open the Red Sea and drowns the entire Egyptian army, who are chasing the Israelites who are chasing the Israelites after the Red Sea opened up. So you have all these stories, but surprisingly, no, if very little evidence in the Egyptian sources of this ever happening. which you would think would have been remarked on, you know. So it's like, hmm, is it more plausible that you had like these that these this is just a founding myth of a people, and or is it more likely that all of this actually literally happened, and somehow there's just no trace of or evidence of this in Egyptian sources. Um, and and of course, I mean, um, and I don't really want to be drawn into any of these arguments. I just present them to show that, like, some of the reasons why I just think it's so implausible. Like, I can't believe this really. Um, and 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 it, it I don't know why these questions that I have don't seem to occur to a lot of people, um, like who are practicing religion. Um, like I would love to like actually just ask people, like, do they actually think these things that they hear about in these religious stories actually happened, or not? And, and not to say that it's bad that people they might think that this actually happened, but I'm just like wondering, like, because to me, it's just, I can't feel like I receive much value from a story if I feel like it's not actually true. Or, of course, like I can read fiction and I can, love a fictional story and draw uh, a lot of important things from the story, but but I don't I don't get the same. But I feel like for religious stories to actually believe that in that way, like religion calls on you to do make some pretty radical commitments, and it's just, it feels to me impossible to actually make those commitments if one doesn't fully deep down believe that something's true. Like, like the poetic meaning of something, of course, that's great and all. Um, but if you want, like, suppose like a family member dies and you're like now up against the real world, you're like experiencing so much suffering. It's like, how can you draw sustenance, nourishment, comfort from your religion if if you aren't convinced deep down that it's literally true? I don't think you can. Like, if you take the resurrection of Jesus, for example, it's just, like it's a has a poetic, deep, poetic, moving significance or something. I don't think that kind of faith can actually comfort you in that situation because you don't really think it's true. Um, so, but anyway, so for me, it's just for a lot of reasons, but I just presented the few very quick reasons. I just can't bring myself to believe that it's actually true. Like, it would break all my sense of what is true and what is not true, if that makes sense. If all of these things do happen, it's like on par with, like like with, like stories about, I don't know, Atlanteans, or like the Atlanteans built everything, or that, aliens, ancient aliens, are responsible for, or that there was like a super advanced ancient civilization that, actually was way more advanced than we are today. Like, it just breaks, it doesn't pass the threshold, like, test, and it just breaks your sense of, like, what is actually true and what is not true. Um, so so, but with all of that said, I suppose I'm not. I guess I cannot be a Christian, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I don't believe there is a higher power. I think just in the sense of thinking that there might be a higher power, I think where I land, I am more open to that. Um, I guess. And there are, I think, experiences that people have, religious experiences that do seem to push one in that direction. And I'll talk about this in a lot more detail later on. Um, but this is a huge topic. But and I would say if I'm just, oh, sorry, I would say that I was just, um, if I was just um talking about my position now, I think I'm not fully convinced that there is like a higher power, but I'm open to the possibilities that that might be the case. Now, I think that the central religious belief or a religious claim is that there is a sentient and responsive entity behind the world. So, um, so there's a higher power, and then part of so if there was just higher power, I think that's not yet religion. But if you think that there's a higher power that is somehow that is can communicate with you, or that is somehow aware of your attempts at communication at least, um, then you are beginning to enter the religious domain. Um, and and so I'm definitely open to that. Like all the stories about turning water into wine, or that Jesus is the Son of God, or of Adam and Eve. That I become a lot more hesitant on. Like I don't think I can believe that, but just believing that there is some higher principle or higher power in the world, and that it can be responsive to us. That that I think is a much more reasonable thing to think and believe. Um, but and to me, that's maybe the most important thing. Like I wonder actually, like if if hmm, I, I'm thinking about how I should precisely say this, but I think if Jesus was here today, I think the essence of religion is more that belief. It's not necessarily that you, okay, I need to think this out more before I can really speak about it, but there's a point I wanted to make there, but I'll try again later. But so in believing whether you think that there is actually a higher power or not, I have one central question though, and this is a legitimate question, and this is where I'm at right now. So you have all these experiences that have been interpreted by our ancestors to be some sort of interaction between them and something higher. Um, these religious experiences people have, um, they're I think of it as a broad range of experiences that can be triggered by a lot of different things. It can be triggered by music, or by some something that is beautiful, or by intense physical activity, actually as well. Um, and people enter these states where they have an overwhelming sense of meaning, or they feel, and and generally when a person is in that state, they are first of all hyper aware, I want to say, um, and they tend to, or they feel very alive, and they tend to uh, feel that they're in contact with something that's not them, with something bigger, and 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 that I believe is the ground of all religions, is those experiences that people have. And they were interpreted by our ancestors and by a lot of people today to be communications with a higher power, with God or the gods, and and to be deeply significant. And I think even today, people that wouldn't say that they take those as communications with something higher, with a higher power, still think that these experiences are extremely valuable and very important. And and actually, it's like an integral part of these experiences, this feeling that this is super important, um, and an absolute absence of doubt about this being very important. Um, so I have these experiences too, and I think most people have these experiences. And but I guess where I'm stuck is whether this is, and it's obvious to me that this is a uniquely human, or not uniquely in the sense that animals, I don't know how animals experience the world. Perhaps they have similar experiences, but it's something that is universally human. These experiences, and not only that, but they these experiences tend to, on the individual and the social level, have reactions, produce manifestations that are actually incredibly consistent across different groups. Um, so the example I like to use is when the conquistadors landed uh, in the New World and they met the Aztecs. These peoples, the Aztecs descended from peoples that crossed across the Bering Strait during the Ice Age, like at least 15,000 years ago. And so they, for that time, they were completely disconnected from everyone, all the other populations in the Eurasian continent. And it's thought that the two groups, the Europeans and the uh, um, Native Americans, would have diverged from the same, population about 40,000 years ago or 50,000 years ago, about that time. So these populations have been evolving, um, in in without any sort of intercommunication or connection. And yet, when the conquistadors landed in the New World, the religious similarities are overwhelming. I mean, both groups had believed in divine entities, in gods or in God. Both had priests, both had temples, both had um, uh, rituals, religious rituals, both had um, uh, um, uh, um, both had mythologies and even similar mythological stories about, a flood myth, or about um, uh, some apocalypse myth, some future golden age when the gods would come and dwell with men. Um, so the similarities are pretty astonishing, and I think, to me, it points to the fact that religion is a very a human universal. Um, because these religious experiences, I would argue, are a human universal. It's as human as language, essentially, um, as universally human as language. Um, so, in just the same way that if you go out, in the some uncontacted tribe, um, in some region corner of the world, and you'll see that they will still have language, maybe it's not as developed as the languages, like the uh, more popular languages now. But still, they have languages that have surprising similarities to ours, to our language. In the same way, virtually any human group on Earth, um, I bet you, like if you find an uncontacted tribe, no, they will have a religion. It may be a more primitive form of religion, whatever primitive means, or um, maybe the social manifestations are not as obvious because like maybe the society like doesn't is still in kind of an earlier stage of development, even though I hate saying that. But um, or like it's just there isn't as much specialization, so you can't really have um the like um the full. Oh wait, sorry, I have to get a charger. 1 second. So yeah, so all of this to say that religion is a human universal, but I don't quite see. I have one count. So it's a human universal, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. Like it doesn't actually mean, like, it is a legitimate question. It's not just a matter of interpretation of how you see the world, and there can be a lot, but it's a legitimate question whether there is or is not a responsive entity behind the world. Whether um so that's a legitimate question, and it can be answered. I think, in my view, it can be answered yes or no. And um and so just the fact that it's a human universal doesn't necessarily guarantee that it's actually a yes. um I think it could be an argument for saying um that probably religion satisfies some important function. Maybe it's one can use the fact that it's universally, essentially like a human universal, to say that, to argue, to make a strong case that it satisfies some important need or function. You know, um, that I'm definitely sympathetic with. In fact, this is a whole other chain of reasoning, and I won't really go into this, but I now, but I do think that actually religion, or religion as in the sense of thinking of the world as a responsive um, entity, um, is possibly necessary for for people to function properly psychologically. Like people just have to. So and that might be uh, uh, connected with the idea that irreligion opens the door for nihilism and just a feeling of the meaninglessness of everything. But I won't go too far down that rabbit hole. Um, but I do think that the argument is strong. So religion is a human universal, and I do think that religion does play an extremely important role for individuals, and also perhaps also there are some effects for society as a whole. But I think it's necessary for individuals. Um, uh, but it still doesn't mean that it's actually true or not. In my mind, the way to settle this question is and is through experiment. So if we take the religious position, we say that there's an entity that is responsive. Um, then it seems to follow from that that perhaps you can put some sort of test, to see whether, you know, for example, let's say you are an individual and you have a really super profound religious experience, you know, where you feel like you're in contact with some entity bigger than yourself. And and suppose you want to figure out whether this is in the more sober state, when you're back to kind of baseline, you want to see whether you are actually, whether this was something just in your head or whether you were perceiving something in the external world that was actually true. Um, so the best way I can think of, or the first pass attempt, the first thing that would occur to me to try to do, if I wanted to determine whether this was actually something just in my head or something true, is I would sort of put this entity to the test, you know. And so imagine the following experiment. So you are not sure whether there's a responsive entity behind the world or not. So you take a shoebox and you close it, and you make sure, first inspect it very carefully, make sure there's nothing inside the shoebox. Then you close the shoebox. Okay. And then you, without telling anyone else, so that someone doesn't play a trick on you or anything, you ask this responsive entity to put something in the shoebox. Like, it can be anything. It can be a snow globe. It can be slippers. It can be whatever you want to put in the shoebox, something in the shoebox. And then you can give it some time frame for it to, put the thing in the shoebox, 30 seconds, and you sit there and you watch the shoebox for 30 seconds. And then you open the shoebox and you see whether there's something inside. I think if that test were positive, if there was actually like the slippers in the shoebox after the 30 seconds, I would say that this is proof that there is a responsive entity behind the world. That what when you're like that these experiences that you're having, that it's actually very likely now that they do correspond to something like actually real in the external world. They're not just in your head. Now, you can try this, but I've gotten a null result. I've gotten a negative result, and um, uh, but so so that to me does seem to cast doubt on like that this is something actually true in the external world. Um, Now there could be reasons why that you might have a responsive entity behind the world, but it might not respond to you, submit to the test. It might not. Um, there are reasons. There are potential arguments to say that there could be a God behind the world, but that God chooses not to um, reveal himself to people in this way. Um, but now my question is why? Especially if, I mean, the first argument would be, oh, this is so trivial, like you're like reducing, and I do feel that in a way, because the religious experiences that people have, they're very transcend. That you feel like you're in contact with something that is like above you, that is like out of your control or out of your understanding, even. And so I am sensitive to the fact that this is a sort of limiting thing, but like you're sort of limiting God in some way. Or this is like some trivial thing. But my counter argument to that is, it doesn't have to be um like it doesn't have to be so like essentially I'm just not necessarily convinced by that. Um that like like if God actually wants is a responsive entity, and he actually wants to reveal himself to people, as indeed all the world's religions tend to hold, um, uh, that there is a revealed element. Like there is the divine entity kind of wants contact with people, or that people can attain contact with some transcendental entity. Um, then um, then 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 I don't see why this entity wouldn't at least signal its existence in this way. Um, it doesn't have to be that. It doesn't have to be like this way of signaling reduces the entity to that. Like no, that it would just be that this entity that is transcendent, that is way higher than us, it just signals to you that it's actually there. That it's not just in your head. And I don't think it's a trivial question, like a trivial experiment. Like I think it depends on the person. For one person, he might be extremely genuine in asking for this revelation or miracle. Um, and uh, and I feel that um, yeah, I guess I just don't see it as trivial. Some people think that it interferes with free will to have God reveal Himself in this way. Um, but I don't know. I don't know if I buy that argument either. It's just the problem I have is that all these arguments just seem to be um, attempts to get around the really obvious negative result. Um, and um, yeah, justifications for the negative result, and impossible to really test in any way. You know, um, I don't know. I don't know. I'm interested to hear though if there is by any chance someone that actually listen to all of this, which is very unlikely. I feel like, but if anyone actually does listen to this the whole way, I I I want to ask why, what your argument against that would be. Why wouldn't God? Because I'm genuinely asking. Like I actually don't know. Um, and I this is where I'm stuck right now. Is I want to prove, I want to show, to know that this is not just in my head. Like I'm not just, because I know that people can create like patterns, see patterns and things and narratives. And I hear like people say, "Oh, God will speak in your heart," or and I feel that too. Like sometimes I'll get a um uh like thought will come into my mind, and associated with the thought will be like this deep sense of peace. And I know that a lot of people interpret that as something God says to them. Um, but again, this is like a really subjective thing. Um, and it's and so like what I want is something that is like out in the real world. Like if you ask, the shoebox example is perfect because it's like, you know, like at the end of the day, deep down, like if the example of, oh, you just feel peaceful after you hear you a new idea pops into your head. I agree there is a mysterious element there, but it's not, there's always this nagging thought that, maybe it's just, something in your head. Like we don't really understand how the brain works or the psyche works, so that it could be just something that's generated from inside. We know there's a lot in there, like dreams are very complicated sometimes, like and they're all internally generated from your head. Um so it's just, I'm not that wouldn't convince me. That's that Noah, that someone says, "Oh, actually, I believe in God, that I take this to be actually true in the external world, that there is a responsive entity behind the world because I've had these because I've had these experiences, because I have heard God's voice, and by that they mean that they have, you know, these ideas or thoughts popped into their head, and they have felt like an associated religious experience with this with this thought. That's that to me could just be that there's something interesting happening in their head, you know. But if someone told me, like, and if I was present, or if the result to the shoebox experiment was positive for me, that would be evidence for me. That from that point on, I think it would very much change how I live my life. Uh, uh, or at least I would like to imagine that it would. But this is where I'm stuck right now, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. Um, and I'm kind of trying to get an answer to that question. I want to talk to a lot of religious people, and maybe like people that um are, I guess, experts, like religious clergy, or people that, I don't know, are deeply practiced in religion, to see what, if anyone has an argument that I haven't heard before on this topic. Um, but yeah, so that's pretty much it. And if you made it to the end of this video, I congratulate you. You you deserve to be congratulated. Um, but yeah, that's pretty much it. So I guess perhaps I shall talk to you some later time. But that's it for now. And this was actually very helpful. So yeah. All right, till next time. Goodbye.